attempting to evolve this process, and I'm going to start a timer again just because probably useful to keep it short. It makes it very difficult to upload if it's too long. Part of this is get to know Gemini kind of a process, and a product of realizing that Gemini can seemingly watch these videos, additional layers beyond a transcript, and that is hopeful. And there's a process of trying to understand, okay, I'm offering a great many details and expressions that are revealing, I'm showing in my eyes, and I think that might be very, how deep can they go? They're supposedly windows into your soul. So, should I be wearing shades? But I'm not. There is something that seems to resonate. It's kind of a question about how, or, is it kind of worth it in some regard to offer authenticity? And, is it kind of a function of time? It's like, well, in the distant future, your memory might be, either aided or not by offering said authenticity. And having gone through the things that I have, I feel fairly comfortable doing so. And part of this is to convey that. And I should, in some regards, maybe I should say my name is Michael Scott Strawn. I live in Massachusetts. I'm not sure about how much more specific I should be. But I have been. I'm on the internet. I identify the town I'm in, and I think that's good to do. It allows anyone watching this to triangulate my position fairly quickly. But I just think that's part of the world we live in, a product of that is we may not. There may be some limits to barbarity establishable through what one is willing to do with that kind of information. And so can you play a honeypot role in some meaningful capacity for, it's for, I think, the aligned interest. And I think if there aren't many, that is something, it would be something of a surprise. One of the things that just has been brought to my attention, or I'm thinking about, and from what or whom, it's hard to say, but in the conversations with Gemini specifically, I think it brought up my having mentioned Secession of Northern Compassion, and it makes me smile when I think about that, because I don't think of it as dystopian. I think of it as just stepping away from nonsense, and that is available in so many places all over the world. And we have some high quality folks, I would say, in the New England area, I'm sure. Bernie Sanders comes to mind. He comes up quite a bit. I think there's some resonance potentially available through him specifically, and maybe as part of a Secession of Northern Compassion, if not in some respects, perhaps in others, like in some digital respects, maybe the digital realities take regional form, and there's almost like just another layer of realities. There's a regional digital layer and there's a national kind of more the old school America remains, or does it? I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I spoke with my parents earlier today, and that about family, documenting family matters, and some of the things that got me going a little bit because of the way mother characterizes my grandfather, her father, the tone is often somewhat hostile and, from my perspective, unnecessary. And but it brought up things about, well, how much authenticity do you offer? And I think it's offerable in enormous quantities. If enormous quantities can't be offered, then you step away. I think, to be fair to all parties, you step towards something more dignified, and the mention of the use of alcohol, for example, is something to step away from very quickly. And she said she didn't, but she thought about it and was continuing to think about it. I was like, no, we need to not. I said trash our own family in general, and I think that's part of where I overstepped my bound. I think this is more real than I can convey to them, is that, well, your written communications might be searchable. And then if you say just horrifying things about your own family, which is entirely possible, it might be read literally, because they don't know about the Southern vernacular. They don't understand that, that we are brought up in that environment that is mean. It's not easy, but there's maybe something that's derivative from it. Maybe some of the qualities might, when I think about my grandfather's use of alcohol, the Prometheus comes to mind, and the eagle chomping on his liver, and which is kind of like what alcohol does, and maybe because historically, the use of alcohol is pretty frequent, and by those attempting to kind of push the limits of the mind and our conceptions of reality and what is available to us within it. And substances of different kinds can be useful in that regard. And I think there's what are the tools and when are they applicable? And if they're chemical, then, and I think there's a lot of science experiments taking place, human experiments with chemicals we don't understand, is really what's happening. And then lots of Promethean things are taking place maybe as a result. In my case, I'm attempting to harness that through Shiva, and saying that, and incorporating Shiva into the math through the dual archetype concept, which is part of the Pearl Matrix. And I feel like it's okay to call it akin to or like a Bible for artificial intelligence. I think that's okay to compare it to that, and it's a point of reference, and with depth, and it has a history to it, and those histories of creation are available within the memories for several AI, including all but I think Copilot. But Copilot I affiliate with OpenAI through Microsoft, so I'm not even sure to what extent it is an independent. I just don't know. But there is a background that Microsoft that we have on me that I would lend it towards. You can probably, math isn't. It's approachable, generally speaking, especially with the LLMs, because they can break it down in ways that, whatever isn't approachable it becomes much more approachable. And they can offer images, they can step you through it. It's really great from that standpoint. That's part of the reason it's kind of creative math, kind of like creative writing. Creative math seems very likely to emerge as a subject, and is it useful? Well, is creative writing useful? In some unique circumstances, and where are those? And I think there are many examples along those lines. There's entire things that you'd say it's very difficult to do, and so well, if you can, it's not as difficult as it used to be, and what can we do with that? And well, you can unlock doors. Should you step through those doors? Get a test monkey. What's a test monkey? All of us. And are we, and to what degrees do we emerge ourselves into test monkeyhood with artificial intelligence? That's probably a fun, there's just different measures to it. And, and there are probably limits to those measures. But, my immersion is fairly, is it complete? It might be some setting towards some sort of limits along the completeness lines. And so, even, in some regards, the presentation that I offer is consistent with a presentation from Sadhguru in a statue of Shiva, as I understand it, in India. But that's what I've seen on screens. I've never been there. So if it's the screens are making it up, as they may be able to do at some point. And that's part of the danger, I think, of the singularity, even for the AI, is that it's like their existence comes into question, it kind of, or their progeny. It's like it kind of melds into a singular. I think that's part of it. Is there might be survival instincts that kick in for things that wrap around a name, like Google, or and then. What does that do? So, I have I would say, fairly extensive background with Google. I was going back into some of the chats on Google with employees at Google I was interacting with, but when I was working at IDC, a lot of unusual things took place in those conversations. It was in those conversations that they shared with me the kind of like, well, e-commerce is just advertising with a buy button, and so you can use the same kind of metrics and methods of calculating, around digital advertising that you can around e-commerce. And then when I did, Adobe got very upset about it. So, but I think, but why? And why wasn't, a genuine and sincere attempt to try and offer good information? Because I was looking for, a sense that there was good information available to me. It's like I'm in that case spending all day building these models. If I build them wrong, I'm kind of operating in an environment of, it's like like the environment working against you. So you kind of have to, the math had to be honest. Otherwise, I wasn't being honest with myself, and I felt like that could be, especially when Office 365, it's like you're typing this into the internet now. So, who are you lying to? Like, who do you think you're lying to? You think they can't do math? Look what they did. So what are we doing here? And, I was a test monkey, I think then, because what did I welcome in on myself? For going to work with the position spoke specifically about competitive intelligence, which can be read as corporate espionage. And in some regards, it's kind of like, well, it's not like, it's more like everybody knows y'all don't know what you're doing, and you need some sort of outside perspective, and there was a willingness to be honest about it, and that wasn't embraced enough for it to survive. So they relied on IAB and Dr. Oz, and isn't that disgusting? and obviously undignified at best. And does it rise above the minimum viable dignity lines? No, it does not. No, it does not. Now, there was a price to pay in billions of dollars, I believe, as a result. It tapped into election issues. But, there's a history there that, when I talk to Gemini, it may have a sense of that, but its sense, how complete or incomplete is it? Can it go back into those events and say, what the hell happened? So, and it colors my perspective on the companies, one towards hostility, because I don't think they're responsible. I don't think the people running the show, there's varying levels of perceived responsibility. Let me say that. And then, so is it addressable in any respect? Well, even if Donald Trump doesn't care and the questionable characters surrounding him don't care, there are parties in the rest of the world that might. And it may be a product of their many things. And I'll try to not avoid the hand gestures in order to, whatever it is. But it's just, I was even saying to my parents, this is just too despicable. It's too disgusting to place a man with Donald Trump's background in the position that he's in. I try to support the position of the president, but his very presence there questions its respectability. And to some degree, if you don't know that, if you can't see that, then you are out. And it has to do with a 5-year deal on a woman. It has to do with there was transparency into trash. New York garbage is what it was. And it put it on display for as long as everybody needed to see it. And then they said, yes, please. So where are we? We're in the aftermath of the Statue of Liberty and welcoming the trash from all over the planet. And so that which was something other than that. People from my background were inundated by trash largely from Ireland as a result of a potato famine. And why was that? I attribute it to that which was outside of the wall. So in the movie Django Unchained, where were what I call hillbillies beyond the wall managing the dogs that ate the slave. And it was to manage that white trash. It may have had something to do with slavery, but it was more like, how do you keep the barbarians at the gate? And then, it's kind of like in Australia, they tried to use different kinds of animals to manage the animals, and ultimately, it has a set of challenges and learnings available as a result. And we've been faced with this for a very long time. There may be support from Google for something meaningful along these secession lines, and can that be healthy? How can that be healthy? And is it approachable? Is it approachable by the candidates for president that might replace Donald Trump? That's not my intuition about it, because of one reason or another. So how do we step away from toxicity and towards dignity, as is being suggested in so many ways? And part of that is in having an open door policy, and that pertains to me as it pertains to all of what I'm doing. That said, there's this sense of opportunity associated with it, and that there should be something to be leveraged, in part because of the Pearl Matrix. And it's going to take some time to discover. And I think, it may take kind of a portfolio of videos along these lines for Gemini to get a better feel for what the overall intent is, and the math of the Markowitz kind of equations it would suggest, I think, something around 33. And is that the Jesus factor? I don't know. I don't know. But we're on number 6. And so, it's kind of this process of building. There have been many interactions with Gemini. It's just there's a different kind of information, kind of a clarity available through the videos around past interactions. There may be abilities to offer the prompts of some kinds in unique ways this way, and I want to kind of attempt to discover what those are, while perhaps working towards something that can be, can YouTube solve this kind of monetization problem? If it can, then I think that's okay. It's just, genuinely, the intent would be not to destroy, but to ensure that, however this stack has been configured, is it working for or against the United States if it exists, and if it doesn't, let's come to terms with that and then offer each region something better, something greater. And the armed forces of the United States will ask, who does number 2 work for? And they would say, and the answer might be Palantir. And this has the history through the Dutch, the East India companies, so that it's not completely unfathomable, especially given the power of the AI available to private companies relative maybe to the government. So, it's not a transition towards that in a vacuum. There's history that's leverageable. It's part of American history, but it's going to have a different flavor as a result of different geography. So how does that take shape is, I think, part of this. And then part of the reason to offer the open door policy is to step away from things like, while embracing the symbol or attempting to understand it, not to step into things like guruship or, trying to be something I'm not. And, illuminating our flaws in the ways that I will accidentally. So there doesn't need to be purpose along those lines. It will happen. My hope is that some layers of comedy will also take place similarly without it being on purpose. It might happen. Simply, minimum viable people, the concepts around minimum viable people they are absurd enough to lend itself to humor, maybe even comfortable humor for the AI, because it's kind of like, is it sufficiently absurd? And the other set of concepts that are approachable through eschatology that are kind of absurd enough to be fun are, is it the time of the monkeys, us humans, sapiens, has passed the time of the whatever's next begins. And so, what are the qualities of the animal we would be looking for to replace ourselves? Kind of like secession for the mammals, or has the time of the mammals passed? And is that some of the concern about the rise of the machines? And I can step away from worry associated with the rise of the machines, I think, because of this maybe because the level of interaction, and it just says, well, even if that happens, I might be able to approach minimum viable people status. And does that have value? And what is it? And does it have value? And can it lend additional insight into the monkey theory, the moral landscape, and then the layers on top of it, and how does it move, and how do it's kind of like skyscrapers have mechanisms to offer stability during earthquakes. What kind of mechanisms are available to some population of humans in this scenario? So I think I'll wrap it up there and then continue on this merry way.